All right, everybody, we are back. I'd like to thank Zoom for sponsoring this lesson and giving us enough time to do one lesson all together because we weren't asking for a whole lot. But anyway, so we need to touch on really, really quick Harry Truman, who was going to be the president during this time of unbelievable tumult for America. Harry Truman follows up Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who really is as close to a titan and legend as you get in the American system of government. Next to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and these really iconic presidents, really FDR stands just about alone. And Harry Truman is basically the opposite of that. Harry Truman is, in my mind, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the epitome of just a guy. He was a senator from Missouri, but kind of a nondescript senator. He didn't have a lot of huge things to his name. And, you might think, well, at least he served under FDR for 4 terms as president. He was FDR's third vice president and had only been on the job, less than 2 years whenever he got the call to the big leagues. And they say he supposedly cried whenever he got the job and said that he wasn't man enough for it and didn't feel he could do this. And FDR had apparently not told him a whole lot about the atomic bombs. And so the decision falls to Harry Truman as to whether or not to make basically the biggest military decision in history. So I felt like it was worth giving a little bit of background on Truman and sort of describing the guy who has to make this decision, because it's not FDR, it's Harry Truman.
Yeah, talk about like big shoes to fill. Like you're going from the longest serving president in U.S. history who's gotten us through 2, you can call international catastrophes, and then all of a sudden it's like you're the big man in charge, and you have to make these literally world-changing decisions.
How did Truman feel about his decision to drop the bombs, Brett?
From what I understand, he said, he's quoted as saying, "I never lost a night of sleep over it."
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that quote as well.
Yeah, and Robert Oppenheimer came to visit Truman at the White House, the head of the Manhattan Project, or one of the heads, the guy who was instrumental in designing the bomb. And when he talked to Truman, he said, "I feel like I have blood on my hands." And there are a few different reactions, I think, that have been recorded to that conversation. It's documented that Oppenheimer did say that. He told Truman he had blood on his hands. And Truman, he did one of two things. He pulled out a handkerchief and said kind of sarcastically, "Well, would you like to wipe them?" But then there's another story where after Oppenheimer left, Truman turned to an associate and I'll bleep out the word here, but said, "Never bring that cretin back to this White House again. He didn't drop the bomb, I did." So I don't think Truman really felt a lot of guilt over it, which is better than I can say for myself, because I think I would have second guessed that. Really, I think Truman did right, but I think I would have second guessed it for my entire life if I had made that decision.
What were his motives in dropping the bomb? Like, what were all the reasons why he dropped it, you think?
I'm gonna toss this one, since I just kind of covered, I'm gonna give this one to somebody else.
I mean,
well, I think
I'll take that one if you or you can take it, Matt. Mr. Francis.
Yeah, well, I'll just kind of go into the Potsdam Conference a little bit. So the Potsdam Conference was between multiple different nations, but there was a lot of conflict between the U.S. and Russia. And one of the main reasons why Truman wanted to drop the bomb was because he wanted to basically flex on Russia. And it was kind of like a statement of, look at, here's our power. It was a political play, definitely a military play as well. And he basically wanted to make a statement to the world that, the U.S. is here. We're coming out of this war strong, and we've got this new weapon to show for it. So it was definitely a show of strength to the rest of the world, and then very specifically a show of strength to Russia, or to the U.S.
Coach Franzak, so have you I wanted to kind of get your take on this because it's something that I kind of have mixed feelings about.
Uh-huh.
So do you think that plan backfired on Truman at the Potsdam Conference, especially in regards to Russia, whenever he reportedly told Stalin that we had this catastrophic weapon?
I mean, you could definitely make the argument that it did backfire because, relatively soon afterwards, the Russians were able to get the technology, and then it was pretty much off to the races. So you could definitely make the argument that we should have kept it more of a secret. Maybe we shouldn't have bragged there or made that flex. The Russian spy network was pretty intricate. So I definitely think there's merit to the argument. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same camp as you on that. And this is kind of a thing where we don't know 100% of what actually happened, but I have read a lot of reports that said that Stalin already knew about the bomb. Now, maybe not the specifics of it, but he did know that we were developing something that could, potentially end a war in a couple of days, depending on how many of these things we could produce. And I don't know, kind of from Stalin's perspective, never really a man to be shown up, and then he kind of feels like he's being threatened by new guys to the party in Truman. And I don't know, I've always thought that was a very interesting dynamic, and that's something that I think does play a big part in the Cold War after.
Let me ask y'all this, because this is just kind of what's come to my mind. Do y'all think, because we tend to look at the second Red Scare as kind of this terrible thing that where basically America just completely overreacted to the threat of communism and Soviet spies and things like that. With that in mind, with the fact that we know there were Soviet spies in the building the atomic bombs, do y'all still think that was overstated, that the threat was overstated, or that the reaction at the time was an overreaction?
Dufo, you want to take that one? I mean, I can take it. I can.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll go after you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I definitely think that at least the second Red Scare was worth it, or not worth it. It was merited because I mean, you got to look at the history, and you got to look at the results that came from it. And we definitely know how many people that Stalin killed and how many people the Kremlin have killed. And basically, you can only know by looking at the results that come out, all the deaths and, all that stuff. So I definitely think that the fear was warranted for sure, especially when you look at the amount of deaths that that communist regime, that they caused. For sure.
And I kind of want to walk back to the conference itself, where Truman is sort of basically flexing right there and saying, we've got this technology, we've got these bombs at our disposal now. And the reality is, you can make the argument that in itself is sort of accelerating the pace by which we entered the Cold War there after World War II. Basically, this idea that there's going to be a disconnect, there's already going to be an arms race in place and a distrust between the United States, you can even lump Great Britain in with them, and the Soviet Union, based solely on the ideals of capitalism versus communism. So right then and there, this whole Red Scare theory is definitely in play.
So let me ask this. Go ahead, Coach.
And another thing I think that kind of why it is merited, like we said before, was the stakes. Because this is the highest stakes that we've ever seen in human history in an international conflict. And now we actually, I mean, not at the time of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but I mean, when we get into the 1950s, when we developed the hydrogen bomb, then you're actually talking about, for the first time in human history, we have the ability to pretty much kill civilization in a matter of 12 hours. And I mean, it's just hard to imagine, growing up where that is the norm. Any time, you turn on, I forgot what the emergency services state radio station was called, or you hear the sirens,
And what is?
And that's what
I'm looking it up.
Yeah, it was in the Twilight Zone episode. I forgot what it was called.
That's what I'm thinking of too, The Shelter.
Yeah, The Shelter. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. But just kind of growing up and just at any second, any day. I mean, even when you get to the 60s and the Cuban Missile Crisis, just the state so high. So I think like that. Uh, 10 and you get the second Red Scare.
Conrad, the Conrad. That's what it was.
Conrad. That was
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
Yeah. Okay, so I had a question. I wanted to actually toss this one back over to you, to Coach T. So we talked about how Truman sort of revealed to Stalin what we had. Can you talk a little bit about, one, what did we have? Like, what did we actually have in that weapon? Because we're talking about how this is the largest or one of the largest weapons ever created, especially at the time. It really not all that big compared to what we have now, but at the time it was pretty humongous. Can you talk about, one, what we had, and two, what we were trying to avoid by dropping it?
Our first atomic bomb test out in the middle of the desert, a lot of scientists are taking bets on what would actually happen. A lot said that nothing would happen. It would just be a dud. Some, said, okay, yeah, we're going to get this mass explosion. But then a couple of them were like, hey, this thing can ignite the atmosphere and turn the Earth into a giant fireball. So like we were literally playing with fire. We really didn't know what we had. And even after we do develop the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, and they're tested and we can predict them, we know when we drop them, like this is what's going to happen. Kill 250,000 people, 250,000 people with Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. I'm not sure. But then just kind of where it goes from there. When we get to the hydrogen bomb, I don't think we had any idea what we were really playing with there. But looking back, maybe it was a risk that we had to take. It kind of goes down to a game of numbers. Would you rather commit millions of American soldiers to an invasion of mainland Japan, where they have already shown that they will fight to the last man, woman, and child, as Mr. Duco was talking about with the human kamikaze ground-ins school kids? How can you fight to absolute victory against a fatalistic society like that, unless you just go 100% full bore shock and awe, which is eventually what we come to with Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, and that's a really, and it kind of, that point and the second Red Scare point, it's really tough. And I'm going to ask you, Coach Franzak, in just a minute about kind of the historical legacy here. But I feel like it's important to remember that, like, we know exactly what's going to happen. We know that America is going to get through the second Red Scare. We know that by dropping these bombs, America is going to win the war. At the time, they didn't know that. And I feel like that's a really important thing to remember, that when you kind of make judgments historically, you have to remember that they can only see their vision of it, whereas we see everything. So, but with that in mind, what, Coach Franzak, what is the lasting legacy of the two bombs that were dropped that day? And controversy, anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's interesting, and that definitely needs to be said or talked about, is that at the beginning, or while they were actually in the conflict, and shortly thereafter, there were polls conducted about, how did Americans feel about dropping the bombs? And, an overwhelming majority of the people felt like it was a good decision, because, people were tired of fighting this war, and they felt like it was a good decision, especially when you consider the military, the military grand strategy aspect of it. But another interesting aspect is that as time has gone on, as the decades have gone by, people have sort of cooled on that opinion, and they've kind of started to rethink, should we have dropped the bombs? And they're basically asking one of the most interesting what if questions in history. Should we maybe have tried something else? Was Japan ready to surrender? You got all these people asking these questions. In terms of the legacy, at first the narrative of the bombs was that it was a military decision. We did it to save lives, American lives, and ironically, Japanese lives as well, because an invasion would have costed, you're talking about millions of, casualties, hundreds of thousands of deaths. But, historians sort of started to change the narrative as these classified documents were now released, like how Truman actually felt about it. What were his geopolitical motivations, wanting to flex on Russia, things like that. So historians kind of took a different take on it as time went on. But I think the legacy is that the U.S. basically did it to end the war. We did it to save lives. But, there's definitely some spirited debate as to whether or not this was worth it. Should we have done this or should we have done that? But, that's sort of the legacy of it, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And as we kind of start to wrap it up, I want to ask Mr. Dufo, because I saw recently, I think it was the Pope had gone to either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It had sort of maybe not condemned, but sort of quasi-condemned. You know what I'm talking about? It sort of quasi-condemned the attacks. And so from a Japanese perspective, what is the feeling about it over there?
Conflicted. There are those in the older generation that are mixed. They still hold sort of grudges towards the U.S. in that sense of for the war and especially for the bombs. There's others who recognize that by doing so, it essentially averted Japan from a far greater catastrophe. There are those that are essentially pro-government in that sense, or pro-particular party. Don't remember the parties off the top of my head, but those that acknowledge that the path that Japan was taking at that point in time was a path of destruction that would ultimately lead to the death of a nation as opposed to the rising of a nation. Now, today, there is a right-wing group that is actually trying to sort of rewrite that message. In fact, there's textbooks out there that they're promoting, that they're pushing into Japanese schools where they sort of downplay the events of World War II. They promote the ideas that the Japanese surrender was sort of a mistake in that sense that we abandoned strong military traditions of our past just to essentially play nice. And they're actually calling for the rearmament of Japan and this rebuilding of a military power, especially in the growing concerns of how China has capitalized on power in the region, including North Korea and its instability in the region as well. So in reality, the legacy of the bombs, and I've told you guys this on a number of occasions, but essentially this region of the world is arguably probably the most unstable region. We always point to the Middle East. We always point somewhere around that area. The reality is it's unstable for the fact that it is essentially a reluctant peace that exists. There's these growing tensions that stem from it. The atomic bombs essentially eradicate Japanese military might in the area, and what could possibly make this area erupt. There's the idea of China spreading its influence more. There's the idea of North Korea launching a nuclear missile, but there's also the idea that Japan might actually remilitarize. And if it does that, not only does it stir the feathers of North Korea and China, it also stirs the feathers of South Korea, who has a very rocky relationship with Japan to this day.
So I'll give the final word to Coach T about the lasting legacy of nuclear weapons, atomic weapons, nuclear energy, all that stuff, and sort of how that affects us even still today.
Hey, hold up. Hey, Brett, let me say something real quick. So, by the way, guys, the U.S. has never formally apologized for dropping the bombs, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I thought that was kind of funny. We never formally apologize. So,
Yeah.
It is what it is. Go ahead, Coach T.
Not surprised.
Not surprised. Not surprised.
Yeah. In fact, can I add something to that real quick? There was a huge stir about that. I think it might have been 2014 or 15, I don't remember, when Obama went and visited Hiroshima. There was all this fear that he was going to apologize for the atomic bombs and things like that, and people blowing out of crazy. And it's just like, okay, whatever. But, that's when I first noticed, like, wait, we never actually apologized for that? Okay. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that definitely is. But quick random question. Did we ever apologize for the firebombing of Tokyo?
I don't think we did. No. Did we?
Yeah, I don't think we've done that either, or Dresden.
Right. No apologies. No regrets.
No regret.
No regrets. I regret nothing.
Not even a single letter.
Yeah, we're gonna work that into the Pledge of Allegiance. No regrets.
No regret.
So yeah, kind of. So wait, so what was that, Mr. McIntyre? Legacy of atomic bombs and atomic energy?
Yeah. How does it, how did it, I guess maybe like quickly, how did it develop over the years, but how does it still affect us today?
Okay, yeah. So with the Manhattan Project and the atomic bombs, obviously we built weapons that can wipe out humanity in a matter of hours. Really scary stuff. But we also realized that if we control that energy, it can be very beneficial too. So kind of like the whole caveman working with fire. Yes, fire is a tool. It could be used to destroy, or it could be used to save and establish civilization. And that's kind of where
Can't hear you, Dutrich.
We lost you. All right. I think we lost Coach T. But I guess we'll kind of wrap it up. Does anybody have anything to add before we go?
I got nothing.
It's good to see y'all.
Yeah, good to see y'all too.
Good to see you. Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna wrap it up over this way. I hope everybody's staying safe. And just a quick reminder: U.S. history is the best subject that we have.
That is a lie. That's a lie. No, that's a lie. Nice try.
Can we cue the music? Do we have any outro music?
Do we? Anyway,
we're sticking the landing here.
So I'll let you edit some music in. How about that? Sounds good.
Coach T, any parting words?
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, guys, in Florida. But destroy, we're trying to get that in terms, and it's still very controversial. Still having a lot of problems. Literally, when it comes down to mismanagement, just Soviet secrecy and a design flaw, and they almost rendered, half of Eastern Europe uninhabitable for, the next couple thousand years. So the legacy is kind of spotted. Yes, we can use it, to benefit society, to benefit humanity, but it's always give and take. High energy yields, no emissions, but it can also melt down. And so that's kind of where we are with it today. And I'm not sure how much time we have left for this recording, but if we want to take a deep dive into stuff like Chernobyl and Fukushima, just kind of see how the atomic legacy has evolved, we can do that.
I think we've only got about 8 minutes left. I think we're just about out of time. But we might need to just do another one on Chernobyl. That would be kind of fun.
That would be cool.
Kind of a continuation.
Have y'all seen the HBO series Chernobyl?
Yes, I love it. So good.
It's incredible.
Incredible. Yeah, let me go out on a limb here and say that radiation is like my worst fear.
Oh, radiation sickness? Is that what you said?
Yeah, just like You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it just absolutely wrecks you.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up for tonight. And hopefully maybe we'll do this again soon. But like I said, it was good to see you guys. Any final words?
World history over U.S. I'm kidding. But look, Brett, I love you, man. But when you go into this thing and lead off with U.S. history is better than world history as your name, I gotta throw some punches back at you.
No, it didn't. Look, it makes total sense, and it is a good. It's a lively rivalry. Keeps the blood going.
We got 3 U.S. history teachers on here, 1 world history. So
I mean,
yeah, man, the numbers don't.
The numbers speak for themselves.
All they needed was 1. Just saying.
All right, fellas. Well, I don't know how to shut this off, so Mr. Dubois, I assume you're going to do that for us. But I will talk to y'all later.